How do you know which character arc is the best for your story? I have talked briefly about this in my first video of the channel, but I focused more on the flat character arcs. Today, however, we are going to check all of the most popular character arcs there are out there, and we are going to analyze in more depth how they apply to stories that we know and love. If you are new here, hi, I'm Vivian Nagy, I am a freelance book editor and I am here to help you make your story shine. And welcome to Nagy in the Margins. First of all, what is a character arc? Well, a character arc is how a character changes throughout the story, is the development of that character, be it for better or for worse. And there are some arcs that are actually flat lines, that is the flat character arc, but more about that later. Any character arc you find out there will fit into the three most basic pillars of character development that we will discuss today. So without further ado, let's dive into them. Just a little note before we dive into that is that the names that I chose to use here are the names that I think fit best, but you might have heard about the same arc under a different name. I've put in the description some articles that I found that helped me build this video, and those articles I saw that sometimes they use different names. So if you find another name, that's normal. The essential thing is that you understand the concept more than you understand the name. Positive arc, very happy, very joyful, we feel glad that it happened. It is the most common arc there is because it is built on hope, on cheerful expectations, on things getting better, improving, something that we all could use a bit more in our lives. The positive arc can act like a mirror of self-reflection for us, the readers, that want to change, that want to become like the hero that we are reading about, like the protagonist that we are reading about. But in real life we can't, be it for lack of courage, be it for lack of support, lack of resources, lack of motivation, lack of time to do so. Or maybe because society and unplanned events got in the way of our transformation. Because of that, we like to see the heroes going through things we wanted to go through, but couldn't. This is why this is one of the most popular arcs that we see in stories, because authors also want to see good things happening in their stories. The positive arc is divided into two subcategories. The first one is the growth arc, and the second one is the redemption arc. On the surface, the growth arc is about getting better, improving, becoming a better person. But on the deeper level, it is about the character facing a conviction they had, a belief that they had, some sort of lie about the world or about themselves, and then choosing to move on from that lie and embracing a better truth. This belief that they have about themselves or about the world usually comes from a past wound, a past trauma, and it doesn't have to be anything so serious, okay? Or it can be also from cultural values in the place where they live in. That's the only thing they know, and they accept that, even if that's not the whole truth. This conviction of the characters, when it comes from an event or a series of events, constitutes the character's ghost. A character's ghost is usually the big thing that happened to them and that explains their beliefs, explains their worldview, explains why they act the way they act, why they behave the way they behave. And this big thing, this beginning of theirs, can happen on the page as the beginning of the story, or it can happen later on the story as some sort of background that is revealed later on, or it doesn't have to be revealed at all. You can just leave implied for the readers to guess. And thinking of that, a character in a growth arc usually starts either as a blank page, so lots of paths open for them to follow, or they start as someone with a good heart but that has a flaw that impedes them to become their best version. Take Bilbo Baggins, for instance. He starts out as your typical Hobbit. He just wants to be there, live his life, eat his food, be peaceful. He is who he is, he believes what he believes because of his life in the Shire. He is a good person, he has a good heart, but he also has flaws. Two major flaws in specific. Number one is that he is petty. Number two is that he is a coward. I know that's a strong word, but it's not in the sense of what you think. He is brave, thinking of confronting the Gollum, confronting the trolls, confronting even Smaug in the end. But his cowardice is actually about not wanting to face and confront problems that are right in front of him and more social problems. We see this plainly when the dwarves arrive at his home. He was there just eating his dinner. I'm not sure which meal it was. But he's there eating his food, and the dwarves simply arrive, disturbing his peace. He doesn't want his peace disturbed, but does he have the gut to confront the dwarves and say, no, please leave? No. To prove my point to you, I brought a scene from the Hobbit movie, and you can see that he does nothing. Balin enters his home, and he does nothing. He throws his coat at him, and he does nothing. He simply... He doesn't even argue. And then Balin eats his food, and look at his face. He's not pleased. When we think of a growth arc, usually the character doesn't go through this change alone. He has the plot forcing them to go through the change. So in the case of Bilbo, he has Gandalf and the dwarves pushing him to confront his beliefs, pushing him to confront his flaws, and choose the right path to become a better person. Bilbo's first step towards his growth is accepting to be part of the adventure the dwarves asked him to join. I'm going on an adventure! And throughout the story, little by little, step by step, he becomes better and better, believing more in himself, embracing his virtues, and accepting his flaws, but not as something negative, just as something that is part of who he is, and that makes him stronger. He ends up being petty. Yes, the pettiness doesn't leave, and we see it even in The Lord of the Rings. But he is also kind and humble, brave in every sense now. And even though he doesn't fit within the other hobbits as much, he learns to embrace his virtues, his strengths, making him a better hobbit, in his vision at least. By the end of the growth arc, you want your character to have not only conquered the external antagonist of the story, be it a dragon in a cave full of treasures or the social hierarchy of where you live, but you also want your character to overcome their own internal shadows. The other positive arc we have is the redemption arc, which is one of my favorites, and I know plenty of you love that as well. I think the redemption arc is one that has a very self-explanatory name, but either way, let's explain it. The redemption arc usually starts with a character that is in a bad place, a dark place. They are not the good guy. They can be morally gray. They can be the villain in someone else's story. They can be just a bad guy in general. Their journey is simply about making amends, getting redemption, thus redemption arc, of the things they did, of the things they thought, of the things they said. Their arc is all about them seeing that they have done wrong, seeing why it is wrong, understanding it, accepting it, and then trying to set things right, trying to make amends. To fight this evil within them, they usually require a major sacrifice or a series of difficult events, difficult choices they have to make to prove they are not bad anymore, that they have grown and they are better. Usually the climax of this arc we see when the character is put at a test to prove that he is not a bad guy anymore in the most excruciating moment, and that he has to make the utmost sacrifice to prove he is not who he was anymore, that they were not who they were anymore. And yes, we are going to take Tolkien again and talk about one of the pains in my heart, that is Boromir. Boromir has a very heartbreaking redemption arc. That's why it is a pain in my heart to talk about him, because he has grown on me very, very much. Boromir starts off as this greedy human that wants to take on the evil things, wants to use the evil things for his own benefit, for the benefit of his kind, and he tries to justify that he is not evil, he is not a bad guy. The thing he is doing, he wants to do, is not a bad thing because it is for the greater good. But because of that, our relationship with him, it starts pretty much like Aragorn's relationship with him. We start off not trusting him, being suspicious of him. We keep thinking he's up to no good. Why he is even on the Fellowship? And whenever the ring is within his reach, we keep this tension of don't let him near the ring. He will take it for himself. He will ruin everything. That's our thoughts. We don't trust him. However, as the story unfolds, his redemption arc starts to kick in. When we get to Lothlorien, we see his real weaknesses being shown. After Galadriel talks to him in his head, he breaks down and he talks about his real weaknesses. Because in the beginning, what we saw as weaknesses, he saw as strengths. What we saw that made him a bad guy, he thought he was the good guy doing the best for everyone. And in Lothlorien, we see why. He reveals his inner weaknesses. He reveals why he is doing what he's doing. And he reveals that he is scared. That he thinks he's not good enough to do the good for everyone as he wants to do. And when we see him break down, I think he is talking to Aragorn about that, the only other human in the Fellowship. We open the door for him. He becomes relatable. That's it. His real weaknesses, his being scared that he's not good enough is so relatable. And then from then on, we start to understand him a little bit more. And because we understand him a little bit more, we start to like him too. But then the story goes on, and because it is a redemption arc, he has his utmost challenge placed in front of him. Frodo is alone with the ring. And that is the greatest chance to get what he wanted. Get the ring to save his folk and bring glory to Gondor again. Yay! He falls under that temptation and makes Frodo use the ring, which brings more tragedy later on, but either way, to escape him, because he became a threat. And if this had happened with the Boromir from the beginning, okay, we would probably say, ha, told ya, I knew this would happen. But because now we know his real self and we are starting to sympathize, if not sympathize completely with him, we feel bad about that. We say, no, don't do that. You were going on a good path. Why did you change? Why did you fall under that temptation? And once Frodo is gone and he's there alone, or he thinks he's alone, we see him immediately regret his actions, immediately ask for forgiveness. And that brings the good Boromir back. Yes, he fell under the temptation, but he didn't like it. He wants to go back. He wants to be good again. That's the thing. He knows he has done wrong and he wants to be better. This is essential for the redemption arc. A redemption arc is not a redemption arc if the character doesn't want to be better. And then we move on to the last part of his redemption arc, that is the heartbreaking part, because it is the part where he is indeed redeemed. It is the part where he goes and makes the utmost sacrifice to prove not only to everyone around him, but above all to himself, that he is a good guy now, that he is not who he was before, that he has changed. If you read the books and saw the movies, you know what I'm talking about. The Uruk-hai are attacking. Merry and Pippin are fighting for their lives, running away, not knowing what to do. The Uruk-hai are going to get them. And then comes Boromir to save them, to protect them, to do the good thing. He's there with all his mighty fighting skills, protecting the little ones. Strike after strike, protecting them, attacking the Uruk-hai, not letting the bad guys come through. And the first arrow strikes. Just like Pippin and Merry, we don't believe it. We finally saw Boromir be good. Be the good guy that we wanted him to be, that he wanted to be. But then he doesn't die. No, he rises and he keeps fighting. And the arrow comes and he keeps fighting and he fights and he tries his best to do what is the good thing to do until the last arrow strikes and he falls. If it was the Boromir from the beginning that died, we wouldn't feel so sorry for him. We would feel bad because, he was still on the good side of the story, he was still within the Fellowship, but since we didn't like him that much, it would be like, oh, okay, that's bad. But we wouldn't mourn him as much as we do with this Boromir. We have his beautiful speech where he finally recognizes Aragorn as king, as his king. That is like the cherry on the top of his redemption arc. And he dies. Then we mourn him. We truly grieve him. We throw a little funeral for him. We put him on the boat so that the river of death can take him away. This is what you want in a redemption arc. You want your reader to go from despising the character to rooting for them, up to the point that if they die, the reader will be truly sad. They will mourn him. This is one of the hardest emotional beats to pull off. So do your research when you are trying to pull that off, because it is hard to write this change. And remember that a developmental editor can help you with that. But either way, you see that this is not a negative arc. It is positive because in the end, we are proud of what that character has become. And this doesn't happen in the negative arcs. In the negative arc, you are looking for your reader to... That's my dog. As I was saying, in the negative arc, you are trying to make your reader's heart ache and make the reader grieve who the character could have become, the good version of them, or you are trying to make them simply dislike the character in the end. That is a possibility too. This pillar of the character development also has two subcategories. One is the corruption arc, and the other is the disillusionment arc. In the corruption arc, the character starts with a potential for good as well as a potential for evil. But we are usually focusing on the potential for the good. And throughout the story, they are seduced by power, greed, fear, you name it. This is a type of story where we see the evil side of the person, the bad side of the person, grow with her as the story goes on. Though we usually see stories where the character has a great potential for good, and then we focus on the contrast between what they could have become and what they did become. The character doesn't have to be good. They could be just neutral. The important thing for the corruption arc is to show that they have the potential for good, as well as evil. The reason that we see mostly the potential for good being overthrown for the potential of the evil is that if the character starts off as good and is going through this potential of good path, but then succumbs to the evil, that hurts more, that's more impactful, and usually the readers like more. But the thing is, they don't have to be evil, truly evil. They don't have to become evil. They can become simply dislikable. The important thing is that they are worse in the end when compared to the beginning. An example of this is Lydia Bennet from Pride and Prejudice.
Mr. Bingley, is it true that you have promised to hold a ball here at Netherfield?
A ball?
It would be an excellent way to meet new friends. You could invite the militia. They're excellent company.
I know she isn't 100% likable in the beginning, but when you read it, especially as an adult, you see a silly teenager. One that cares too much about vanity and cares too much about frivolous things. And that's normal for a teenager, so she's in the neutral ground. She is a bad influence on Kitty, her sister, of course, as we see plenty of times being mentioned in the book, but Lydia is a teenager. That's all. She still has the potential for good. Her sisters try to make her turn to the good side, but because her mom likes her the way she is, her mom's opinion is much more valuable than her sister's, so she continues to be the silly, frivolous, vain teenager. And with her, we can see a good comparison because Lydia and Kitty are very much alike. We can see that they both have the same trajectory projected for them. But while Kitty follows the good path and with her sisters, she grows to be a better person. She has a growth arc. Lydia has a corruption arc because she succumbs to her vanity and her frivolity and her greed to show off that she is better than her sisters. When she marries that jerk, she is corrupted. Completely corrupted. I hated her, even though she's just a teenager and I am 27 years old. I hated her. I hated her. You know how despicable she becomes if you read the book or if you have seen any of the movie adaptations. Lydia isn't a villain. She isn't evil. She's just a bad person. She is overcome by her greed and her envy and turns out to be a very bad person. But that doesn't make her evil. She's not a mastermind trying to kill people. She's just a bad person. She's worse in the end of the book than she was in the beginning. And that's why she has a corruption arc. But if we take the corruption arc to a higher step, I'm going to talk about The Lord of the Rings again, and if you are new, I think now you know that Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite stories. But we're going to talk about Saruman. Saruman has the higher level, one of the higher levels of corruption arcs, because his story starts off as him being Saruman the Wise. He is the head of the council of the story. Saruman begins then as a very good person. We have Gandalf going to him to ask for advice, to ask for help against the evil. His arc, however, throughout the Lord of the Rings shows him giving in to the temptations of Sauron and his power, because Saruman wants that type of power to himself, and we see that him trying to replicate that in the end of the Return of the King. But he betrays his own kind. He's fighting alongside Sauron. He's helping Sauron control Middle-earth. Not so good for a guy who was sent to Middle-earth to protect it from Sauron. In the end, the corruption arc will have your readers openly dislike, hate, despise the character, and feel sad for what they could have become, but feel angrier at what they did become. This isn't quite what happens with the Disillusionment Arc. In this arc, the character usually believes a lie that for them is the truth, but he's then met with the real truth that is very quite bad under their perspective, and it shatters their reality. Instead of growing from knowing this truth, choosing to fight and try to make it better, they get depressed, they get bitter, become nihilistic, In this arc, what usually happens is that we like the character from the beginning and we understand their point of view. We see hope for their future. We want them to get better. We want to see the growth arc. But as the story goes on and things keep getting worse and they don't make the right decisions, then all we are left with is the grief for what they could have become and the pain for what they did become. In this case, we usually don't see us getting angry at that character for being broken and making the wrong choices. We get disappointed. We feel pain for their decisions because we keep thinking of what they could have been. One example of this is Winston Smith from 1984. Winston begins as just another person in a dictatorial world. He knows the truth. He knows that the party controls, by manipulating everyone, controls the population. But the thing is that though we know that he knows the truth, there is another type of lie that he believes that is the truth. That he believes the party can lose, that the party can be taken down, and that is his hope. He hopes that the party will fall. When the truth is revealed, it is way more devastating than anyone could expect. It is pretty much worse than he imagined. His hope is shattered, his illusion that the party can be defeated is shattered. He truly becomes disillusioned. The climax of this arc happens when he is there being tortured and he has the utmost choice of betraying Julia, that is his rebellion partner, or not. If we are thinking of a growth arc, we would probably see the typical hero's journey choice here, that he would sacrifice himself in order to keep that hope alive in the form of Julia, and that Julia would then keep on with this rebellion of theirs, and the story would go on, and we would keep that hope that yes, maybe the party can be defeated. But because he chooses to betray her, we see that he's simply devastated by the truth that the party is much more powerful, much more cruel, much more deceiving than he thought the party was. And because of that, he realizes that any type of hope he could have is gone. He turns out to be just another clog in the machine. And that hurts. Another example of the disillusionment arc, though not so explicit as Winston, is Frodo from The Lord of the Rings. Frodo starts as your typical hobbit who also has some tendencies to go into adventures because he keeps hearing the stories of his uncle. But when he goes on his own adventure, he is faced with a much, much darker world, a harsher truth than what he was willing to believe. I think there is a moment, I don't remember in which book, that he mentions to Sam how different his adventure is turning out to be when compared to Bilbo's adventures. And then by the end of the book, he does something that takes Sam by surprise and takes us by surprise too. That is, he becomes Isildur. Sam says, "Cast it into the fire, destroy it." And Frodo says, "No," and puts on the ring. If we didn't have Gollum there following them, and Gollum having the audacity to attack Frodo and bite off his finger to get the ring, we would probably have a very tragic ending because Frodo succumbed. He was so delusioned, and the ring finally corrupted him. Because one of the things that helped him not succumb to the evils of the ring is that he was hopeful. He wanted to fight back. And when he doesn't have the hope anymore, the ring finally gets to him. But then the disillusionment arc for Frodo keeps going because he sees that his last glimpse of hope, that is his own self, it was shattered too. He couldn't even trust his own self to do what he was set to do. All of his purpose was lost. Frodo is broken inside. That Nazgul wound on his shoulder is the reminder that he is corrupted as well and he will never heal. His hopeful and original view of the world, it's broken. He cannot see it the same as he did before. He doesn't believe in anything anymore. That's why he goes with Gandalf, because he doesn't fit in. He is not the same Frodo. Unfortunately, he is a worse Frodo, because his actions in the end were not what he was supposed to be. By the end of the negative arc, the character has lost their essence. And just a little side note, there is a third category in the negative arc that is the fall arc. I believe that the fall arc is within the disillusionment arc, is a variant of the disillusionment arc, because up to the end they are very similar. But whereas the disillusionment arc, the character sees the truth and embraces the truth, even though they become depressed, bitter about it, and they give up their hope because of that. In the fall arc, they see the truth, but they choose to ignore it, choose to neglect it. They cling on that lie that they have been telling themselves. And because this is basically the only difference, like how they react when they finally see the shattering truth, I like to think that it is a variant of the disillusionment arc. But in the description below you can find some articles that explain a bit more of the fall arc if you are interested in that. Thinking about that difference between the disillusionment arc and the fall arc, let's do a little exercise and put there in the comments examples of the fall arc that you can think of. I want to see if you, just by knowing the difference, if you got what the fall arc would be. Then we get to the flat arc, the one that I have briefly commented on my first video of this channel. I'll reinforce the idea and explain a bit better here though. Because when we see the name flat arc, we usually think that's boring, but it isn't. It's just a different type of arc. And we can think of that arc when the character is an icon, a steadfast icon that doesn't change. That's basically it. In this arc, we don't worry about the characters believing a lie or knowing the truth, because in this arc, the characters usually already know the truth and they live their lives knowing the truth. They make their actions because they know their truth, and they can be good, they can be bad, they can be neutral, but they are there. They act the same way. The main thing with a flat character arc is that it is a line, and because it is a line, it means that it's not an arc where they change. They don't change. They stay the same from the beginning to the end. So you can think of it more like the character doesn't change, but the world around them changes. Sometimes they are there to act as the spark that ignites the fire that will create the development of another character, like Gandalf is to Frodo, like Obi-Wan Kenobi is to Anakin, like Dumbledore is to Harry. And I just noticed when I was speaking that most of the mentors are flat character arcs. They are not flat characters, this is different. I'll make another video later explaining flat and round characters, but most mentors do have a flat character arc, so Coincidence? Maybe? I will not talk again about The Lord of the Rings because I have talked a lot. And with Gandalf, I already explained a bit of Gandalf's flat character arc in my previous video. So the only thing that I will mention about Gandalf here is that you have to think, does Gandalf change? No, he doesn't. If you think of his personality, if you think of his essence, he doesn't change. He may have gone from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, but the way he acts, the way he talks, what he believes in as Gandalf the Grey are basically the same thing as Gandalf the White. If you take Gandalf in The Hobbit, he will be the same Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. So you see that his essence, his personality doesn't change. His beliefs, his choices would be the same. Another place we see plenty of flat character arcs is within detective stories. Sherlock Holmes is the greatest example because you might not have read Sherlock Holmes, but I bet you have an idea of what Sherlock Holmes is like. He will always be this extravagant, sometimes a little bit rude, straight to the point type of detective who always notices things that others don't. And that makes him an excellent detective. And another detective that fits the flat character arc is Harry Hole. Harry Hole is my favorite detective so far. I have read up to the Leopard, but you might know him from the most famous book Joe Nesbo has written, that is The Snowman, that has even an adaptation, a movie adaptation. It doesn't do justice for this amazing book. But anyways, Harry Hole, throughout the whole series, he is the same. Joe Nesbo has written him to be the same. He has the same flaws, he has the same virtues in every case he has to solve. His attitude towards the criminals, his attitude towards his colleagues, towards women, towards kids, towards witnesses, towards the victims, is all the same, from the Bat up to the Leopard. That is when I stopped reading. I cannot say for sure after the Leopard. His actions, his manner of speaking, his word choices, everything is the same in every case he has to solve. With flat character arcs, you don't want the character struggle to be about becoming something, be it for better or for worse. What you want is for them to remain themselves despite any type of pressure or change. Now, I want to give you some food for thought. Can I have a character that goes through multiple character arcs in the same story? The answer is yes, you can. Usually that happens when we are following a story that goes through more than one book. One case is The Hunger Games. Katniss Everdeen, our protagonist from these 3 books, she has a flat character arc in the first and in the second book. She starts out with her view of the world, she knows the truth about the capital being terrible and everything, and the more she gets involved with President Snow's puppetry, the more her views are reinforced, the more her truth is reinforced. And the Katniss that we see entering the arena in Catching Fire is the same Katniss that we see entering the arena in the Hunger Games. But then, in the end of the Hunger Games, we start her disillusionment arc, we can call it that. Because in the end of Catching Fire, we start with a new theme, and that requires a bit of change from Katniss. So throughout the end of Catching Fire and most of Mockingjay, we have Katniss changing a bit of her beliefs, seeing a new truth, and a bit of it has to do with what the Capitol did to Peeta. Her arc becomes a disillusionment arc for a while because she's seeing more and more that Coin is not that much of a rebellious leader that she wanted her to be, and that she ends up resembling President Snow in some parts. And then the catalyst moment of her delusionment arc is when the bombs fall out, kills her sister, and she learns that it wasn't the capital who dropped the bombs. It was the resistance. And then her truth is really shattered and she is delusioned because the rebellion, her last hope, isn't a hope anymore. And then her arc turns again, and instead of falling into the basics of Disillusionment Arc, she twisted like a growth arc and acts on the things she saw and stops Coin from turning into another president's no. But then she goes back to being the same Katniss, she goes back to the flat character arc, and then in the end of the Mockingjay, the last chapter of the Mockingjay, is the same Katniss. We see the same Katniss as the beginning of the Hunger Games. So look at your own characters. Is the story changing them? Or are they changing the story? Do they fit any of the character arcs mentioned here today? Drop a comment below because I would love to know what character arcs you all have been using. And if you are worried that your character's journey feels a bit too flat when it should be transformative or too transformative when it was supposed to be flat, a developmental editor is here to help you. You can check my website below in the description to see if you want my professional set of eyes taking a look at your character's journey. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you on our next video, and until then, go fill your books, Martins. Bye!